Hey, howdy folks, this is the Curator. This is my first full-length YouTube video. Welcome. Today we'll be discussing the Confederation of Planets, also known as the TCP. This was a small multi-star system faction. They were originally founded July 24th, 2142, and dissolved January 1st, 2163. So let's dive into this little faction. The Confederation of Planets, as previously stated, it was a small faction, having a population of 463 million people overall. I understand that doesn't sound particularly small, but in this timeline, mankind it has well over 20 billion people. So it had 4 member nations in total: Planet New Babylon, Planet Fandago 4, Planet New England, and Planet Masada. They had a technology tier of 5, a standing army of 24.4 million soldiers, and 221 capital warships. Political information. The governmental ideology of the Confederation of Planets is an oligarchy. Their head of state is that of the High Senator, and their governing documents are called the Articles of Unity. They have multiple sub-branches within their government: the Division of Internal Security, the Bureau of Advanced Intelligence, the Confederation of Planets Armed Forces, the Planetary Naval Force, the Biological Research Division, the Virological Research and Development Division, and the United Corporate Alliance. Those are the different sub-branches within the TCP government. As you can see, many of them have different aspects. A part of them is mostly military. The Division of Internal Security is like MI5, and the Bureau of Advanced Intelligence is like MI6. And the Confederation of Planets Armed Forces was led by Generalissimo Ivo Milkovich. However, Milkovich was the highest ranking official, despite there being many other officials. Social information. The capital city is called New Capua. It's spelled C-A-P-U-A. Their official language is English, however they do speak many secondary languages, primarily Russian and Spanish. The type of currency the TCP has is called the TCP pounds. History. Founding. The Confederation of Planets was founded by General Ivo Milkovich. Ivo was stationed on planet New Babylon. He was in charge of the Crescent Guard Corps. Ivo was an older gentleman. He had multiple years of loyalty to the Unified Earth Colonies. However, June 17, 2141, the general learned of the UEC's plans called Operation Purification. This operation was set to be the UEC's plans to take over the entirety of mankind through extensive bloodshed. He was driven crazy due to it'd be impossible for anybody to really think this was such a good idea, be capable of such horrible things. However, upon further investigation, it was confirmed real. As a result, Ivo would cut the ties of the people of New Babylon to the other territories of the UEC. Ivo would soon start running political meetings amongst his soldiers to gain favor, and soon enough they would conquer the majority of the soldiers underneath his leadership, all becoming loyalists to Ivo. April 17th, 2142. Ivo would have a substantial following of his own soldiers, and began campaigning with the citizens as well, broadcasting widely the different plans the UEC had for mass genocide. This would result in many of the colonists converting due to seeing these horrendous acts as detestable and grotesque. With that all being said, Ivo would strike out, killing many of the non-loyalist soldiers first. He would take over every major military outpost using his network of trusted allies. The assault was very bloody. Hundreds were killed and betrayed by their own allies, and soon enough the FDCA, also known as the Federal Department of Colonial Affairs, would be overrun. They assaulted the many large buildings they had, using the military personnel they've accumulated over time, and overran the non-loyalist police and government positions too. Soon enough the battle ended in a matter of days. The citizens and military overthrew the government and installed a temporary provisional government to keep the nation in check. And that's when the Articles of Unity would be established thereafter. They ratified and installed it all within months of the coup, and they established a new government, the Confederation of New Babylon. In 2144, the TCB would move on to Fandago 4 and instill their seeds of knowledge and doubt on the citizens of Fandago 4. Later, they began infecting Masada and Planet New England within the Epsilon Meridian star system. With all those planets officially joining, they renamed the Confederation of Babylon to the Confederation of Planets in 2145. Governmental style. The government within the TCP is officially known as an oligarchy. This means Parliament or the Senate holds absolute control over the TCP with nothing to oppose or rule. This Parliament is run by the High Senator, who can remain in office for 5 years of up to 5 terms, or just 25 years. Moreover, the parliament has absolute authority. One party and everybody all had the same agenda, and standard senators only served 3 terms of 5 years. The government hardly regulated their own corporate companies that reside within the territories, letting them grow and fester amongst themselves on unrestricted capitalism so their nation can gain wealth and their need to wage war against a more powerful nation. Additional history. The Confederation of Planets continues to grow and to become a minor power outside of the UEC. The UEC would officially be installed on declaring war due to a government bureaucracy and later further stalled by the Mongolian campaign in 2147 through 2152. And eventually, post-Mongolian campaign, the UEC Senate opted to stay out of the war itself. Less than a year after the ruling, and the TCP would strike against the UEC directly. A ship known as Mothership 15. Mothership 15 was unaware of TCP's treacherous acts, and they attempted to use the fandago system as a temporary stop to let their reactors cool down. The TCP did not see this as just a civilian vessel. In fact, the TCP assumed it was actually hiding a large majority of the soldiers in disguise, using civilian spacecraft as a method of infiltrating the TCP unknowingly. The TCP sent multiple star cruisers to intercept and assault Mothership 15. The assault was very violent and brutal, very quick and efficient. Quickly, the TCP operators that entered the vessel understood that this was purely a civilian vessel on the surface, with less military personnel. However, the TCP needed prisoners and leverage over the UEC. Supposedly, they needed to stick one to the tyrants. This would start the eventual fandago campaign and the actual downfall of the TCP. To note, the large majority of the TCP's military resided within the Epsilon Meridian star system, so that's where the UEC targeted first, taking back Meseta and Planet New England. The combat was officially started in 2155, soldiers amassing on those planets and the war plundering both. Meseta surrendered in 2158 and Planet New England in 2159. The UEC was not fully committed to this war as it was deemed unnecessary expense for a target that is only attacking civilian vessels and not attacking settlements. The UEC Senate believed only a small force should be dedicated to these wars and maintain the illusion that the UEC is in control and prevent additional spacefaring nations from seeing them as weak and taking advantage of that. October 27, 2160, a full 7 years into this conflict and less than 3 years left in the TCP's lifespan. Through that time, the TCP spent a lot of time making propaganda and trying to get the citizens across New Babylon and Fandago forward to support the war effort by funding and buying war bonds, as well as joining the military ranks. The war had now reached the last 2 planets. The TCP felt hopeless but did not give up and will not give up. The UEC only committed 210 warships to this war effort, most of which were only supply ships. Another thing to be known is that the TCP had intense military prisoner of war camps. These camps could work them to the bone as cheap labor to build their weapons of war. Even worse, the TCP heavily invested in their biological research division and their virological research and development division. They ended up making the REV7 virus, also known as the rabies Ebola virus strain 7. This disease could reanimate the dead, according to what was uncovered by Operation Groundhog, while raiding one of the TCP laboratories, also known as Outpost Black Card. This outpost was a big laboratory used by the TCP. This Operation Groundhog was conducted August 15th, 2161, conducted by a Cosmic Ranger Unit Foxtrot 26. Further data and evidence was discovered on the PNFS Sagon. This would all be uncovered by the Ranger Unit Foxtrot 26. This operation was conducted August 19th, 2161. The war would continue with the efforts to take Fandago being quite slow. However, September 7th, 2161 is when the war would change. General Izimo Ivo Milkovich believed the invasion was necessary to stop the UEC's involvement, to scare them to stop the war. It had the opposite effect. Because of the public outcry and backlash of this sudden invasion, the public cried out for war. The UEC responded by sending several thousand additional ships and soldiers and conscripts to invade Fandago 4, including the assassination and architect of all the TCP's prisons, Arjun Iyengar, during the liberation of the final TCP prison called Operation Manumission. This operation was conducted December 17th, 2161, by Cosmic Ranger Unit Foxtrot 26. Many additional assassinations were conducted by Cosmic Ranger units in order to take out TCP High Command. Another important TCP figure was known as General Moskowitz. He was next on the chopping block for Foxtrot 26. They raided the Bureau of Advanced Intelligence Black Site known as Black Site Zeta 17. The operation was conducted using multiple Marine units. The operation was a success, although Moskowitz almost got away. Soon the entire planet of Fandago 4 was conquered, and the UEC began setting their sights on the TCP's final bastion, Planet New Babylon. January 11th, 2162 is when the invasion began, and by July, a large majority of the planet was already conquered, or amidst being conquered. Prior to this, the PNFS King Arthur began construction on Planet New Babylon, a top-secret hidden weapon, a secret hidden plan created in 2159. This was a last resort attack for the TCP, one last good hit against the UEC that could last forever. All this information was discovered by Foxtrot 26 during Operation Clean House. This operation was conducted on a hotel located in the city of Killamong. The operation was a smooth success, only losing one personnel on the UEC side. It was a disaster for the TCP side. Information about the King Arthur has come out, and surely the UEC could squash it. The TCP would lose New Babylon. However, they successfully launched the King Arthur, and it managed to warp away using the light-speed warp engine that they modified, and arrived in the Sol system. Upon arrival, it was intercepted by multiple Upnik naval cruisers around Mars. They launched a large raiding party, sending around 150 Cosmic Rangers, including Foxtrot 26, to board, and around 300 Marines as well. They attempted to gain control of the King Arthur. Fortunately, they were able to secure the nuclear missiles that were on board and prevented them from being fired. However, personnel aboard the King Arthur had additional contingency attempting to crash the ship into the planet. They were hoping it would be capable of setting off the nuclear missiles. What they did not know was during the raid prior to the downfall of the UECs, soldiers managed to disarm, disable, and store away all the nuclear materials to prevent this problem. They crashed into Brazil within the South American Federation territory. 101 TCP soldiers managed to survive. 34 UEC personnel did as well. All 101 TCP soldiers were put on trial. Many of them were executed for crimes against humanity. Life underneath TCP. Life in the TCP was considered a non-life. Most of the waking moments of the nation's existence was preparing for war, creating tanks, weapons, and more. Surveillance was at an all-time high, keeping track of the citizens to make sure they were always on task at hand. The TCP said it was for the greater good, and the tyrannical UEC would also do the same thing. And one day, they would come and do whatever they could to crush them, and they needed to be prepared for the TCP's final moments. In addition to the heightened surveillance, they made it intentional so they would prevent people from sympathizing to the UEC. And they also heavily changed the schooling system to indoctrinate children into the idea that the UEC is the worst thing in existence. As stated, most of the jobs are focused on being part of the military or being productive for the military. And all the corporations were running completely untamed. Many believe that once the war was over, the TCP would eventually drop all the total war philosophies when it came to their economy. However, they did not last long enough to see if this would happen afterwards. The TCP was not overtly horrible as all the citizens were well fed and clothed well. However, they did have the lack of pleasures that many others would enjoy: vacation, time off, and the nicer things of life. But the TCP believed there is no room for such desires during these circumstances. Unethical practices. As previously stated, the TCP employed a lot of unethical tactics, such as POW camps designed by Arjuna Yenger. These are what most of the camping conditions were like. The Confederation of Planets and its prison camps were among the harshest known in mankind. Generally, they deliberately deprived the subjects of sunlight, always making them asleep throughout the day and work throughout the night, giving them sun deprivation. Sun deprivation includes depression, emotional instability, and weaker immune systems. Prisoners within the TCP camps often manufactured weapons and arms for the TCP itself, and the guards consistently surveyed them, keeping an eye on them to prevent sabotage. The prisoners flip-flopped on what they were doing every day, so it was never quite the same. They deliberately separated families from each other to further deprive the subjects of connection, including most of their friends too. If the guards ever saw you interacting with somebody more often than another, they would move you away or even switch camps, depending on what they decided. Speaking to the guards themselves when not spoken to first results in beating, sometimes so harsh you could even die. Everyone there had virtually been stripped of all their communication unless they were off work and in the sleeping houses. Disrupting the assembly ballots also gets you punished with differing amounts of brutality. One instance, one subject was tied down for several days in a completely black room with no lights at all. No way to use the bathroom, no food or drink for the first 48 hours. Afterwards, they would hose you down and throw you back to work. The TCP often kept track of the prisoners by using prisoner codes. You must memorize those codes. If you did not, you would also be punished. Food rations were often very small, often served with small amounts of pickled meats, a bread roll, generally stale, and a small cup of watered-down black coffee. The beds the prisoners slept on were often made of straw, rubber, and other materials that made it fairly loud when you tossed and turned. Every 3 hours, they would wake up the prisoners in their housing rooms and make sure they were still there. Prisoners were also denied having shower privileges, unless there was a prison-wide inspection conducted by the warden every month or so. They would bring in large mobility shower units, allowing the prisoners some sort of a shower. However, the water was often cold. The prisoners will remain in a type of formation for the usual 5 hours while they inspect the facilities and the prisoners themselves. Another horrendous act conducted by the TCP was the creation of the REV7 virus. This disease was created through many years of strenuous experimentation and activities, which eventually resulted in the disease. The disease had a brief outbreak on the PNFS Saigon, resulting in the staff and personnel aboard being consumed and infected. What led to the downfall? The TCP was riddled with problems in their hierarchy, with many of them disagreeing how things should be. Some believe the TCP really needed to go to war so that the whole human race understood exactly what the UEC was planning. Others believe they should just remain as a separate independent nation, far away from the UEC politics and genocide. Other things, such as the small size and their inability to stop an army as large as the UEC's military arm, UPNIC. They continuously kept digging themselves into a hole they could not get out of, especially when they attacked the UEC colony ships and eventually the UEC settlement known as Sidori City. This all sealed a deal that led to the whole thing rapidly downfall, and eventually the dissolution of the Confederation planet as a whole. Allies. The TCP only had one real ally, and that would be the South American Federation. They only traded weapons, supplies, and food. However, the SAF never officially got themselves involved in any other means. This was all intentional by Minister Julian Santiago. The only known enemy of the TCP is the UEC, and as stated for many reasons, that's why. Neutrality. The TCP also had neutral relationships with the Asian Pacific Empire and the United African Conglomerate, and many other minor factions of the time frame. However, all factions chose not to get themselves involved. And that's all, folks. This was a culmination of many, many years of planning and hard work. It all finally came to an end. These bad guys were originally developed back in 2019, which for many is not that long ago, but I was like 14. They've progressed quite a bit since then. They didn't really have too many good reasons for the war or why they were bad guys. Now they have a much more complicated backstory, much better understanding of politics and other aspects of life when it comes to war. Overall, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you want to subscribe, feel free to do so. If not, no pressure. Anyways, that's all I have for you today. Have a good one, folks. Peace out.